In part two, I'm going to look at some more recent forgers, fakes and copies, starting with what I think is a very interesting copy of a Renoir. This isn't a side-by-side comparison here. What you can see here is a genuine Renoir. It's called Two Sisters on a Terrace, although Renoir actually called it Two Sisters. And it's in the Art Institute of Chicago. It was donated in 1933, and the person who donated it, Annie Coburn, bought it from the dealer Paul Durand-Ruel for $100,000 in 1925, and that dealer had originally bought it directly from Renoir in 1881. That's what we call an impeccable provenance. It's a genuine Renoir. Well, why am I emphasizing a genuine Renoir? It's because of this photograph. In 2005, Trump's biographer was interviewing him when he noticed a painting on the wall, which he immediately recognized as a copy of the original in Chicago. And he asked Trump, but Trump maintained that his painting was the real one. And the Times wrote, now fake art can be added to the list. Mr. Trump is accused of claiming that his copy of Renoir's Two Sisters on the Terrace is the real thing, when it's well known that the original has hung in the Art Institute of Chicago since 1933. The president, whose replica was previously displayed in his private plane, liked to tell guests that it was worth $10 million. End quote. Now, $10 million would actually have been a bargain, as the highest price paid for a Renoir was $78 million, and that was in 1990, and it's estimated that that painting would sell today for about $160 million. That painting, incidentally, was Dance at the Moulin de la Galette, and it was bought by a Japanese businessman, and is now believed to be in a private collection in Switzerland. Now, you might be thinking, or some of you might be thinking, hold on a minute, I saw Dance at le Moulin de la Galette at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, and you're right. Renoir painted a second, smaller version, which is the one sold by Sotheby's to the Japanese businessman. So he painted two versions. So now you're thinking, did he paint two versions of the Two Sisters? Well, all I can say is not as far as we know. Let's leave it like that. One of these paintings was involved, and you can probably guess which one, but I'll tell you in a moment. One of these was involved in an art forgery case that went to court in 1932. A German art dealer, Otto Wacker, was being tried for selling what were claimed to be forged Van Goghs. And the court brought in two expert witnesses to authenticate the work, but neither of them could agree. One said it was genuine Van Gogh, the other said it wasn't. So the court decided to turn to chemistry and forensic testing. And this is interesting because it's the first court case that has used scientific testing to authenticate a work of art. And it was the beginning of the use of scientific evidence. They called in a chemist, Martin de Wilde, who was asked to find any chemicals Van Gogh could not have used. And he found a pigment that Van Gogh couldn't have used. And he found resin that makes paint dry more quickly, which is something that Van Gogh also never used. Forensic testing, as I said, began with this trial, and during the trial, or after this evidence was presented, the police found a studio where Otto Wacker, the accused, brother was working with many unfinished Van Gogh forgeries, so they needed no more evidence after that. Which is the forgery? I think you probably know that the one on the left is a genuine Van Gogh, and the one on the right is the forgery I've been talking about, and both now are in the National Gallery of Art in Washington. The one on the right is not on display, though. Van Gogh incidentally painted about 35 self-portraits because I think he didn't have enough money to pay for a model. Coming back to what we might call a conventional forgery. Not long ago, there was a British newspaper, in fact it was the Telegraph, reported that all works except one in an exhibition of 21 paintings by the great Italian painter Amedeo Modigliani were fake. A French expert on Modigliani said that he is one of the most copied artists in the world, and his paintings sell in the millions. It's believed, in fact, that there are over 1,000 fake Modigliani paintings in the world. So which is the fake? Let me reveal all. This time it's the fake is the one on the right. It's by a well-known forger, Elmir Dahori, who in his 30-year career created more than 1,000 forgeries, many of them, he claims, still in museums and private collections. I'm going to be talking more about these forgers that you'll be hearing about or have heard about and will be hearing more about today in a later talk, specifically about I think I've selected 12 best known master forgers. Now Dahori was a con man, and as well as an artist, and he convinced everyone he met that the paintings he was offering were genuine. He fooled the likes of Marilyn Monroe, Liz Taylor, Rita Hayworth, and Orson Welles. Another fake, and this one's got a longer story connected with it. The Caracas Museum of Contemporary Art in Venezuela had Matisse's odalisque in red trousers on display when a collector raised questions about it, and the museum investigated and discovered that it was a copy, and it had been on display for at least 2 years, between 2000 and 2002. 10 years later, the FBI set up a sting operation in Miami. They met 2 people who were negotiating the purchase of or the sale of this painting, the one that had been stolen from Caracas. And the thieves were asking $740,000, not knowing it was the FBI. And even though the painting would at that time have been valued at about $3 million, they were both arrested, both pleaded guilty, and were sentenced to 33 and 21 months in prison. But inexplicably, the United States hasn't returned the paintings to Venezuela. This has led to protests outside the Caracas Museum in Venezuela. At one point, a dozen topless women wearing only red pants were protesting on the steps of the museum. In fact, after all the publicity, the fake painting is now going to be worth a great deal more than it would then. And some people say that the second painting, the one the FBI set up the sting operation for, was itself a copy, and that the alleged genuine version is another fake. But coming back to these two, which is which, the original is on the left and the fake is on the right. Sorry about the reproduction. It's a little bit blurred, so it's a little bit more difficult to tell which is which. Let me show you, I mean, another artist. I said Modigliani, there's thousands of fakes. Matisse is another artist that is often faked or forged. This is another one. One of these, and in fact, with this one, you can probably guess which, is by the master forger that I mentioned just now, Elmire de Hory. And he, in fact, didn't copy the masters. And that in fact, is quite normal for a very well-known artist like Modigliani or Matisse. The forger won't copy because the original is probably going to be in a museum somewhere, so it's easily detected. What they do is they paint in the same style. Well, how do you paint in the same style? I think I read a quote earlier, I think it was Leo Stevenson, who was talking about it's a bit like writing a play in the style of Shakespeare, and that's why it's so difficult. But de Hory has got a slightly different view. He thinks this is all romantic nonsense. To quote him, "Could you write a story like Hemingway by trying to put yourself in Hemingway's mind and soul? Could you become Hemingway?" No. It's a terribly vulgar and romantic explanation, though I'm sure the public eats it up. What I did was study very, very carefully the man's work. That's all there is to it. End quote. So when studying his work, for example, he was originally drawing with easy flowing lines until he realized that Matisse often hesitated when drawing a line, perhaps when he looked up at the model. And so de Hory learned to interrupt the lines he drew when he was painting in the style of Matisse. So he claims Matisse was the easiest artist to fake, although in this side-by-side comparison, you've probably already spotted the de Hory. Yes, it's the one on the right. In fact, today, de Hory's, what should we call them, pastiches, are still available for purchase under his own name. And there have been reports even of forgeries of de Hory's forged work. And fake de Hory's, believe it or not, are being sold at auction for $2,000 to $3,000. I mean, I don't know how you tell the difference between a fake de Hory and original de Hory. They are signed variously by de Hory on the front as Matisse, Modigliani, Picasso, and they have these ones that he now paints are signed by himself, de Hory, on the back. This is another genuine Matisse with a fake. This time it's another forger. It's not de Hory, and you should be able to spot the fake immediately. Although remember, these fakes are taken by many people as the original. I'll let you know straight away. Yes, it's the one on the left. Is the fake, and the genuine one is on the right. In fact, the one on the left was one of a signed limited edition of 49 works by the infamous forger John Myatt, entitled Yellow Odalisque in the style of Henri Matisse. So Myatt became so famous in his own right that he wanted people to own a genuine Myatt. And here he's produced a print in a limited edition of 49, which he sells as a genuine Myatt copy in the style of Matisse. I'll be talking more about John Myatt and in fact de Hory in the talk I give about famous forgers. Now, the other artist, apart from Modigliani and Matisse, the other artist that's often copied is Picasso. And the reason is because there's no authoritative catalogue raisonné of Picasso's work, because he painted, well, it's estimated that he produced some 50,000 paintings, drawings, prints, sculptures and ceramics. And to make matters worse, he often didn't sign his work. He once, in fact, declared he would sign a very good forgery. And he once, when he was asked to sign his work by someone who was buying it, he scribbled his signature all over the work, defacing the canvas with multiple signatures. Now, one of these was bought by an antiques dealer at a car boot sale. He paid £230 because he liked the painting. He thought it was a fake, but experts at the Brighton and Hove auction rooms told him it could possibly be genuine. It could be, they knew that the original was in the Museum of Modern Art in New York, but this could have been an early draft, as it had what appeared to be a Picasso signature on the back. Now, well, let me tell you now that the one on the right is by David Henty, and Henty makes a living now out of selling, yet another forger who makes a living out of selling replicas of Picasso's work. And he said that it's definitely mine. It's just one I gave away about 3 years ago. I did it only for a bit of fun. I wasn't planning on selling that one. I just painted it for pleasure, and somehow it ended up in a car boot sale and was bought by the antiques dealer. So it wasn't, as the Brighton and Hove auction rooms thought it might be, another version by Picasso. It's by David Henty, and the one on the left is the genuine Picasso in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Dürer. What an artist. Nearly 11,000 books and articles have been written about Albrecht Dürer, and yet things are still being discovered about him. He was the son of a goldsmith, and he quickly emerged as a rival to his contemporary Leonardo da Vinci. His skill, let me tell you one anecdote before I get back to the forgery part. Giovanni Bellini is said to have asked Dürer for the brush he used to paint the single hairs in his realistic beards, and Dürer just gave him an ordinary paintbrush, which was in fact the one he used. It wasn't the paintbrush, it was his extraordinary skill that achieved the effect. Now, in 1500, when one of these was painted, a full frontal pose was exceptional for secular paintings. It was used, full frontal views were associated with images of Christ. And in fact, one of these pictures was used as a depiction of Christ in a 1520 woodcut. It's, as you probably have guessed, it's the one on the right is by Dürer, self-portrait with fur-trimmed robe. And in fact, it's the last self-portrait that he painted. The one on the left is a copy, but it's interesting copy because it's a bit of a mystery. Well, some people think it's a bit of a mystery. It's believed to be by Abraham Wolfgang Koerfner, And he, according to one version, he asked the city of Nuremberg, who owned the work on the right, if he could make a copy, and he painted a copy, but it said he gave the copy back to Nuremberg and kept the original. Now, it's fairly certain that the Elector of Munich bought the original from Koefner in 1805 because Koefner gave the Elector a receipt. So why did Nuremberg demand the return of the work in 1822? Had they just discovered that they'd been given a copy, that Koefner had tricked them? Later, incidentally, the Elector's collection was given to the nation, and it's in the Alte Pinakothek in Munich, which is where it is today. The one on the left is now in Nuremberg, their art collection. It lacks Dürer's signature, AD, in the upper left, like the one on the right, which raises the question of why Nuremberg didn't realize they had a copy immediately. So it's possible that Nuremberg knew and were complicit in this and sold their painting to the Elector, to the Bavarian Royal Collection, and knowingly kept the copy. I don't know why they demanded the return in 1822, but that could have been for another reason. Dürer, incidentally, was so talented and so well known in his day that many artists in the 1500s copied him. And Dürer, to one of his engravings, added the inscription, "Be cursed, plunderers and imitators of the work and talent of others." So he was really annoyed by all of the, as you could imagine, by all of the artists who copied his work. Now, the National Gallery purchased this work in 1923, believing it to be an authentic 15th century painting. However, scientific analysis showed the pigments used weren't available in the 19th century, and the painting had also been varnished in shellac to simulate age. And there's no similar painting to compare it with. I was going to show you a similar painting that included children, but as far as I can tell, there aren't any, or in fact, there's very few representations of children from the 15th century. But here, there is one example, and it's worth showing you. It's not a copy of this one, but it's worth showing anyway. It's An Old Man and His Grandson by Ghirlandaio, which is similarly late 15th century, painted at the time that the one on the left was claimed to have been painted, although it was actually painted in 1923. The one on the right is interesting because at the time, appearance was thought to signify inner virtue. So in other words, if you had a beautiful face, it meant you had a beautiful mind and you were a beautiful person, a virtuous person. If you had an ugly face, it meant you were an evil person. Yet here is an old man with rhinophema, a skin disease which was mistakenly then linked to alcoholism, which it isn't. And Ghirlandaio painted him, as you can see, sympathetically, and his grandson is tenderly placing his small hand on his chest while his grandfather looks down affectionately. In fact, I've got a quote here. The famous art historian Bernard Berenson wrote, "There is no more human picture in the entire range of Quattrocento painting, whether in or out of Italy." But as I said, there are, apart from this, very few paintings of children. This is Fornarina by Raphael, Some say it's his girlfriend, others a picture of a beautiful woman assembled from different models. But instead of comparing it with a copy, what I thought I'd do is just show you an artist, this is Leo Stevenson again, painting La Fornarina for a TV documentary. I mentioned he did do copies for television programs. And as you can see, it's a bit difficult to see here, but I can tell you it's identical, except he created the original colors. So the red is more crimson, and it's the original, it's what it would have looked like when it was originally painted. The blue of the sky is brighter, so you can see the myrtle tree more clearly. The blue has faded, so it's much harder to see. In fact, in this reproduction, you can hardly see it at all. Stevenson said on this television program, I always try and put a secret in my paintings. They will deliberately fail certain scientific tests. For example, sometimes I'll put a joke in or a saying in the first layer of paint. And if you x-ray the painting, you'll see it. For example, I did a Venice Canaletto several years ago. And if you x-ray it, you'll see a submarine coming out of the water, so that no one can be fooled that it's a genuine and pass it off later after he's sold it as a copy. Well, I won't say more about this particular painting, the Raphael. I'll just quickly go over this. One of these is an Alfred Seasley, and one is by the forger Tom Keating, who another famous British forger. Let me just show you straight away which one is by Keating. It's the one on the right, who has signed it Alfred Seasley. I'll be talking about Tom Keating in my talk about famous forgers. Lowry is another one of the most forged artists, and one of these works is by the forger Max Brendret, who I mentioned previously, known as Max the Forger, jailed 3 times for forgery. Although now he's 70, he says he'll never do it again. He's copied hundreds of famous masterpieces and famous artists. And he's recently, and again, another book I recommend if you're interested in this sort of thing, it's a book he's published recently, I think about a month ago, called Britain's #1 art forger, Max Brendret, The Life of a Cheeky Faker. He grew up in Bernardo's orphanage. He left when he was 15, joined a circus, and found that he could paint, and started painting forgeries to make money. What he would do is take them with a friend, feign ignorance, say that he picked it up at a house sale, took it into a well-known dealer, and let them discover it in the middle of a lot of worthless paintings. He would put one of his forgeries in the middle, and the art gallery would go through and then suddenly stop on that painting and say, well, this is interesting, and he would claim to know nothing about it. He in fact said there's so many Lowrys and impressionist fakes floating around, you can pick up a good Van Gogh for a few quid abroad. His is the one on the left, and the Lowry is the one on the right. Hard to tell, in fact. Another forger of Lowry. This isn't Brendret. This is in fact, this is David Henty again. And sometimes genuine Lowrys do emerge, but here we now know one of these is the original and one is the fake. The genuine painting was bought by a husband and wife in 1967 from Lowry himself and kept in the family. So it's good provenance. When they died, their children decided to sell their 4 Lowrys, and one of these is the most expensive one they sold for 165,000. This is back in 1967. It'd be a lot more now. The other is by an amateur artist, David Henty, who says he's sold hundreds of fake paintings by different artists on eBay. Let me show you that the copy, the forgery on the left, is by Henty. And as I said, the one on the right we know is by Lowry because of the provenance. There are lots of other artists who've copied Lowry as well, but I won't show you them now. The British art forger Sean Greenhalgh that I mentioned before has painted many convincing Lowrys. One of these is by Max Brendrich again. He could draw as a child. His mother was poor, and his father left home, which is how he ended up in Bernardo's children's home. And it was there that he was encouraged to draw. He never went to art school. As I said, he ended up in a circus cleaning out the elephants. He traveled around with the circus. He lived on his own, in his wits. He drew and painted when he could. He found that he could copy well-known artists, even as here, Renaissance artists. And he would take them to auction houses and feign ignorance, as I said. He was jailed 3 times for forgery, and this painting by, well, let me show you which is his. The one on the right is a copy, a forgery of the Caravaggio on the left in the National Gallery of Ireland. He sold his copy for £2,500. One of these is, I've only got a few, I'll be finishing soon, by the way. One of these is by Claude Monet, obviously, and painted when he went there in 1908. And the other is by Ken, excuse me, Ken Perreni, an artist who became a major player in the underworld in New York in the 70s through to the 90s, and became one of the most prolific and well-paid forgers in the world. And his aim was to master his craft so he could create the works of the masters using the same techniques they used. And he never regarded them, his works, as forgeries, but as a continuation of the master's work, is the way he put it. He now, incidentally, paints works that he sells openly as copies. And he, again, has published his memoirs in 2012. And he didn't typically, by the way, copy such well-known works. And this work by Monet is in the Museum of Fine Art in Boston. He would, Perreni would copy artists like James Buttersworth, who's an English maritime artist, or Martin Johnson Heade, an American painter of seascapes, or Charles Bird King, another American painter, and sell them as forgeries to famous auction houses like Christie's and Sotheby's, and they got bought by wealthy private collectors. And because their works were less well known, they sold for a fairly substantial amount of money, tens of thousands of dollars, but not the millions. So that they escaped detection, and they didn't go through the full scientific forensic analysis. His work, as you probably have already worked out, is the one on the right, and the original is on the left. This is the final work I'll end with, and I'm taking a slightly different approach here. It's a single work in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which they claim is by Circle of Jan Bruegel the Elder. Now, let me tell you about an artist called Eric Hebborn. His golden rule was never to sell to amateur buyers. he always dealt with the top galleries. And the reason was he allowed them to judge if a work was genuine. So he claimed if it turned out to be fake, it was their failure not to recognize what he thought was an obvious forgery. So he didn't want to sell to naive amateur buyers who couldn't have recognized a forgery. He thought that the top galleries ought to be able to recognize them. And it's thought that he's created, and he claims to have created, thousands of forgeries, making him one of the most prolific of forgers. And he's painted in the style of Bruegel, Van Dyck, Piranesi, Corot, Rubens, and so on. And he claims that his work is still hung in some of the finest national galleries in the world. He had an astonishing artistic talent. He trained at the Royal Academy, of their art school. When he was at the Royal Academy, he earned the prestigious Rome Prize, and then he worked as an art restorer where he learned additional skills. He opened a gallery with a partner, and he claims to be able to draw in any style at all, and he believes that it's the artwork, the art world to blame, and looks down on so-called experts, he calls them, who can't tell when a work is genuine. In a BBC documentary, he said, I quote, "I think you might possibly find an honest man. I just don't think you'll find an honest man who's also a dealer." Now, in his memoirs, which is why I'm showing this work, his memoirs, Drawn to Trouble, he claims this etching is by him and it ended up in the Metropolitan Museum, and the museum claims it's a work by Circle of young Bruegel the elder. We may never know, because in fact Hebborn met an unsavory end. In 1996, he was found with his skull fractured in Rome, where he'd lived for 30 years. And there's rumors that the mafia was involved in the murder, but no one has ever been arrested in connection with the crime. So we don't know why he was murdered and who did it, but we'll never find out exactly what he painted. Incidentally, we admire the forger's skill often and forget that it is actually a crime unlike any other. And forgers are often part of the criminal underworld, so can come to a violent end. So you never know, even the leading art galleries can be forged. So next time you visit a gallery, maybe you'll have your doubts. But let me leave you with this thought. Art forgers, as we've seen, are very skilled artists, and they're criminals. They know all the techniques that I've described here, and they can overcome most of them. So detecting a forgery is very difficult and very expensive. A starting point is to buy the catalogue raisonné of the artist, and if it's not listed there, it's probably a forgery, as new works are very rare. Visit art galleries, please visit art galleries, look at works by the artist, and then call an expert. And whatever you do, don't call me. Thank you.